I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So in this video, as always, we'll be taking up the important articles for 24th of March 2023. So Rahul Gandhi, he gets 2-year jail term in the defamation case, and because of this, his Lok Sabha membership hangs in balance. And the legal experts, they are going to study the verdict. So a Surat court, it convicted the former Congress chief Rahul Gandhi in a criminal defamation case and awarded him a 2-year jail term over his "Why all the thieves they have Modi" surname comment. So because of this comment, he is being given 2-year jail term under this defamation thing. So that is one thing. And so in the landmark 2013 Lily Thomas versus Union of India judgment. So from the perspective of examination, this judgment of Supreme Court is very important for us to remember, which is talking about the defamation thing. So the Supreme Court, it had clearly spelled out that a lawmaker stands immediately disqualified on attracting a sentence of 2 years or more unless the conviction is stayed by a higher court. So it clearly spelled out that a lawmaker stands immediately disqualified on attracting a sentence of 2 years. So if, like in this case, like Rahul Gandhi has been awarded a jail term for 2 years, and if it is even if more than 2 years, then your Lok Sabha membership or your Rajya Sabha membership, you're basically disqualified from the house. So that is one condition. And apart from that, we have the IPC section 499 and 500 that deals with defamation. So these are some of the sanctions regarding defamation. And moving forward, so there are certain developments regarding the online gaming and its taxation in the state of Tamil Nadu. So the State Assembly, it re-adopts the bill against the online gambling. And as of now in India, when we talk about the pan-India level, we do not have a single legislation, or we can say a comprehensive legislation, clearly speaking about basically banning online gambling, or whether, like, we're also talking about that whether it should be taxed or not. So all of that, we were like not having any one particular and comprehensive law regarding this thing. So that's there. And moving further, we see that India, it rejects the Johnson and Johnson's attempt to extend patent on the TB drug. So it's a vital intervention. So when we talk about medicines or the drugs which are used for treating tuberculosis, it includes bedaquiline, which is manufactured by J&J, which is Johnson and Johnson. So it's a crucial anti-TB drug. And we know that tuberculosis, it's a bacterial disease caused by a bacteria. So India has rejected the J&J's appeal to extend its patent beyond July 2023. And right now it is like highly priced, around $400 for a 6-month treatment regimen, and the prices, they are likely to fall further. Apart from that, after July, the generic producers, they like Lupin and Macleods, they are likely to manufacture this drug, because we are seeing the patent rights, they are going to end after April. So as we know that India is the world manufacturing hub of the generic medicines. So in that context, basically producers, the domestic producers, they would now be eligible to manufacture bedaquiline. So in this context, there's a term which is often there, and it can come in the examination, that what do we mean by evergreening when it comes to the pharmaceutical sector. So evergreening is a strategy to extend the life of the patents about to expire in order to retain the revenues from them. So basically, the firms or the manufacturers which are already enjoying the patent rights, they would like to extend that period, because obviously that is kind of one way through which they are making huge profits. So they would like to get that period extended. So in that context, we have the term evergreening. And they do this by making multiple claims in its applications for the patent extensions. So coming to the editorial page, this article is about climate change survival guide to act on. So we saw that this week the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it released the synthesis report of its sixth assessment report AR6 cycle, which is drawing together key findings from its six most recent reports. So the report, it gains added legitimacy as its summary for the policymakers is approved line by line by the governments of the world, and United Nations Secretary General has also called it a survival guide for humanity. So that's there. And having a look at some of the key takeaways already, like we have discussed something about it, but let's see if there's anything missing or not. So some of the key takeaways includes that the report, it confirms that human activity is unequivocally driving global temperature rise. Definitely that is very clear, and this has reached approximately 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels already, whereas our target was to prevent it from rising by 1.5 degrees Celsius, but the temperature has already increased above, or it has already increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius. So this rate of emissions growth, it has slowed in the past decade, but humanity is estimated to be on a 2.8 degree Celsius, which is basically by 2100. That is what we are expecting. And so the first takeaway is that the amount of carbon that the world can cumulatively emit before reaching the key temperature limits, which is the world's carbon budget, is far lower for 1.5 degrees Celsius than the 2 degrees Celsius target. So this is one key takeaway कि जो भी budget है world's carbon budget की अगर हम बात करते हैं वो बहुत ही कम है to prevent the temperature from increasing by 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to preventing it from increasing by 2 degrees Celsius. So carbon के लिए जो budget है जो allocate किया जाता है उसको और increase करने की ज़रूरत है. That is one key takeaway. Second one is that the recognition of the greater risk at the lower temperatures points to the necessity of early climate adaptation. So here we're talking about climate adaptation because starting May we saw key temperature sorry, it is already increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius. So इस case में भी it is important कि mitigation तो important है ही, but साथ ही साथ आप क्या adaptation के लिए क्या चीजें कर रहे हो, क्या steps ले रहे हो, how you're trying to adapt different kind of things to this increased level of temperatures. And क्योंकि इसका obviously कुछ negative impacts भी होंगे, कुछ positive impacts भी होंगे, but negative impacts we can expect more. So उस scenario में it is important we are focusing upon, we are doing research as far as adaptation is also concerned. And the most important, the key message is, or when we talk about while the diagnosis, that is definitely dire, what about the prognosis? So the leading message of the report is that of urgently adopting climate resilient development. So which is a developmental model that integrates both the adaptation and mitigation to advance the sustainable development for all. So this is the key message. I would repeat that a developmental model, that is, we are talking about the climate resilient development. So it is a kind of a developmental model that integrates both adaptation and mitigation to the advanced sustainable development for all. So जब हम sustainable development की बात करते हैं तो उसमें दोनों aspects होना important है. दो aspects, first adaptation, second is mitigation methods. So that is what we can call it to be a climate resilient development. And iske context mein we've been also talking about climate resilient crops, so that can also be one part of the solution, and that is we're talking about millets here. And moving further, so the progress report, so how is the world doing in this regard? What is the world doing here? Like in the very beginning, we talk about that carbon budget that needs to be increased. That is very less as of now as far as our target levels are concerned. So what else can be done, that also needs to be pondered upon, that needs to be researched about. So that is one thing. So there are several gaps which remain as far as humanity's response so far is concerned, and the report points out that there are gaps between the model sustainable pathways in what countries they have pledged, as well as the substantial gaps between what countries pledge and what they actually do. So अगर यहाँ पे हम गैप की बात कर रहे हैं, तो गैप इज बेसिकली जो कंट्रीज टारगेट्स देती हैं या जो भी कंट्रीज इवन बजट भी एलोकेट करती है, there is a gap between that and what the countries or the firms or corporations they are actually doing in real sense, or what they are actually doing on the ground to like be it mitigation or be it adaptation. So is in दो चीजों के बीच में gap है which needs to be addressed. So the IPCC AR6 synthesis report, it is a landmark report because it offers a blueprint for sustainable development while presenting a sobering account of present and future damages to ecosystems and the most vulnerable amongst us. So it is now up to the governments and the people of the world to act, given there are assessment reports which are telling us very important things. So we need to take all those learnings, all those key takeaways, and implement necessary steps accordingly. So that is the thing about the climate change survival guide and the sixth assessment report, which is published by IPCC. So a combination of the features of the two pension schemes seems prudent. So if we're talking about the old and the new pension scheme, so in this context, it is the Union of Finance Ministry which is related to all those changes and the policies related to pensions. So the Ministry of Finance reiteration in the Rajya Sabha recently of the legal position, that is the absence of any provision to allow the accumulated corpus of the members of the national pension scheme to be refunded and deposited back to states, that should have a deterrent effect on those states contemplating return to the old pension scheme. So the ministry's standard reflects what the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority Act 2013, the PFRDA regulations, and then we have other regulations, whatever they say. So here one important thing that we get to know is that PFRDA, firstly, it is very clear that it is the regulatory body for the pensions sector, for the social security, and it is a statutory body. It's a statutory authority. Statutory means it has been established under a law that has been passed by the parliament. So the act was implemented, or we can say passed, in 2013. So that is one thing. And moving further, so center, it has also been making it clear for the right reasons that it is not considering any proposal to restore the old pension system. So as experts in Reserve Bank of India, it points out that the annual saving in the fiscal resources that a reversion of the OPS entails is short-lived, and the potential fiscal benefit would be overtaken by the huge liability later in the form of pension system. And even former RBI Governor D. Subbarao Sir said, even called this idea to be very regressive, with more privilege for the government servants than the public, many of whom have no social safety net. So these are these are his personal beliefs. And you can just have a look over this second paragraph, what it's talking about. So India's independence movement was a melting pot that had freedom fighters from contradictory and even conflicting backgrounds and ideologies. So basically, we use a term or a phrase here that it is called the melting pot. So basically, melting pot is, we can say, in a way, coming together and performing different cultures, celebrating different customs and traditions of different cultures. So that is what we can try to, understand about the melting pot theory. So this article is talking about that the Aboriginal people, they must get permanent representation in the government. So Australia is on track to reckon with the dark chapter in its history after its Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made a promise to bring to its voters a referendum to constitutionally recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, thereby giving them permanent representation in the government. So at relevant places, you can even cite this example, which was in the context of Australia. So coming to this opinion about is India really in the grip of a stray dog crisis or not? Because ऐसे बहुत सारे इंस्टेंसेस अभी देखने को हमें मिल रहे हैं कि स्ट्रे डॉग्स की वजह से बहुत सारी स्पेसिफिकली बच्चों की डेथ्स हो रही हैं. सो दैट इज व्हाई दिस टॉपिक इज देयर एंड here we are seeing that the authors they are Meghna Onyal, who's the director and co-founder of Humane Foundation for People and Animals, and we have Shailja Chandra. She's the former chief secretary of Delhi. So, is there a stray dog crisis in India or not? Is the question, and is this a problem unique to India only? So here we see that firstly, some context like this is not an Indian problem specifically. It is very much a global issue also, and this is primarily because our relationship with dogs. That's why this thing is global. So we like dogs and we want to keep them and we breed prolifically. So globally, supply always tends to exceed the demand for dogs, and as a result the surplus animals they end up on the street. So here also we are having a kind of, we can say, economics that because of supply being more than demand, we are having the stray dogs. So the difference between the countries lies in how we address this problem, because this problem is global. So the difference is obviously in the way we deal with this problem. So US, it has zero tolerance policy for stray dogs, and up to 3 million dogs and cats they are euthanized every year in USA. So that's how they deal with this thing. And India, we allow those animals to end up on the streets and leave them there only. So this is even violation of our laws, which is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which is the principal act for the protection of animals. It recognizes that dogs are the domestic animals and suffer on the streets due to homelessness, and they also impact the human beings, and they should therefore be sheltered, rehomed, removed, or euthanized. So this is even violation of our laws. And even at the municipal level, we have municipal acts which are meant for the protection of people that also mandates capture and removal and say that they should be sheltered, rehomed, and euthanized. So even at the local level, we have certain acts. And historically, euthanasia, it was done in a crude and haphazard manner. And municipalities, they would catch the dogs and use the cheapest methods of killing them, such as electrocution, gassing, or poisoning. So the problem, it became about how these animals, they could be humanely captured and our laws implemented in a systematic and logical manner. So पहले अगर हम, like, there are obviously several options of dealing with the problem of stray dogs. So अगर हम euthanasia की बात करें तो historically जिस तरीके से it was being implemented, it was executed on the dogs, वो थोड़ा crude and haphazard manner में किया जाता था. But the problem is कि how these animals, आप उनको कैसे humanely capture करके इस problem को भी solve कर सकते हो, and कैसे humanely भी आपको ये जो ethical element है इसको भी आपको ध्यान में रखना is very important. And at the same time you need to also ensure कि कोई भी law भी violate नहीं हो रहा है during this entire procedure. So that is one thing. So coming to the next question, which was raised here, that is the municipal authorities, they had the power to euthanize the unclaimed street dogs. So the 2001 animal birth control rules, they took these powers away by creating a category which is called the street dogs as opposed to the strays. And the PCA Act, that is the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. While bearing cruelty, it does not restrict municipalities from euthanizing the stray dogs. So how did we end up with laws at cross purposes? So here, Shalja Chandra, she has to say that municipal corporations, they are governed by state acts, but there is also the Ministry of Urban Development, which is supposed to bring together the policy and the technical aspects. So we also have the Ministry of Urban Development, and we also have the state acts for this thing. So municipalities, they are expected to provide assistance in technical matters to the states. So this is the role what the municipalities they have to play, and which in turn give like such information to the Ministry of Urban Development further. So that is there. So the Ministry of Urban Development, however, it is heavily involved in activities such as construction and the sewage management, and it does not have the bandwidth or interest to get into sections of laws. So the municipal acts, they have rigorous provisions for the containment of the menace caused by the street dogs, but these are ignored by the officers who generally take their cue from the political milieu in which they are operating. So that is also somewhere we can say one of the problems also because of which we are seeing the this crisis. And moving further, so the most efficient and the most prolifically breeding population would have to be sterilized when we talk about the solution. And sick animals, aggressive animals, etc., they would have to be euthanized. And a segment of the population can be sheltered and so on. So we are trying to basically get the idea that we can categorize even the stray dogs into different categories, and then we'll be having different kind of solutions for dealing with them. Like it is here we have categorized them in three categories. So basically, most prolifically breeded population that can be sterilized, the sick and the aggressive animals they can be euthanized, and the other population which is left that can be sheltered. So that's how we can deal with this problem. And the next question is that, but it is also common to see that people moving around with sticks and thrashing these animals. So there seems to be a fair bit of public anger also against these stray dogs, because uh, we also hear about certain instances of cruelty towards the animals. The dogs, they are beaten up by people with sticks. So that is also one of the issues. So this is not only an issue of how nobody follows any laws and the municipalities don't do what they're supposed to do. Obviously it is not the responsibility, how in a way it is, but when it comes to the role of civil society, even they have their certain kinds of responsibilities, duties, and obligations. So our laws are there both for the welfare of the people and as well as for the dogs. So laws for the protection of the people and animals, they say that stray animals that should be removed from the public spaces and sheltered, rehomed, or euthanized. And people do take out a lot of their anger on the animals. There's so much of frustration these days, so that is taken out actually on these stray dogs. So that is one thing. So when you pit people against dogs and you end up giving stray dogs the same rights as their children, retaliatory attacks on these animals increase because there is no way for the people to otherwise protect their families physically. So they are basically venting out their frustration and their anger on these stray dogs. So now we are seeing that increasing stray dog attacks inside the gated communities and in hospital premises. So such instances are increasing. And when we talk about the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, it is an animal welfare based legislation which lays down that animals, they can be used, they can be owned, managed, and even killed, but in a humane manner. So the law is looked at from the lens of human rights when we're talking about this act. So human rights, similarly animals do have rights. So it does not give the rights to animals, it vests in us the duty to protect them from unnecessary sufferings. So basically this act is not talking about animal rights, it is talking about human rights, that humans, they have the right to protect these animals from unnecessary suffering. So even this is the right of the humans. but they don't have the right to beat them or be aggressive on these animals. But today we have the act, and there is a set of subordinate rules also that are meant to enforce the act but make it redundant. So that's where we are seeing that the act is not being effectively implemented. And recently, like, we also had an update about the animals' birth control rules. So, do they like really work towards solving any of these issues that we are witnessing right now in this one particular article or not is the question. So, under the new ABC rules, that is the animal birth control rules, stray dogs, they are not even street dogs. So, they are community dogs. So, that's how they are being addressed in the new rules. So, they are being addressed as community dogs, not as stray dogs. So, just the name has been changed, but no, we can say substantial change has been made apart from just changing how we're going to address them. So really we can say that the real problem is not being addressed, and obviously the real solution is not there. And there's again one of the problems that the brunt of the stray dogs problem is borne by the poorest people, given the disproportionate representation, the dog bite, and the child mauling instances. So, does something have to be done so that the crisis has more political resonance? So, if this things kind of becomes like important for the political parties in terms of winning the elections, if this becomes a political issue, so definitely it can be addressed, but how it can be made a political uh, issue, or like how it can basically benefit the political parties, is to be looked into. So that's there. So finally, it is the duty of the officials to implement the law and of the legislators to amend or modify a law if it is not working. So it's very clear that there are officials, there are administrators who are there to implement the laws, and there are legislators to make a new law if there is a need for that, or if there is some need of modifications in the present law. So that is the duty of the legislators. So neither has been done, neither of these options they have been utilized. And unless the politicians they are shown that they are allowing this to go on under their noses, it will not have any kind of effect. So looking at the plethora of the cases that are being reported periodically in the press, this story has been going on for around 10 to 15 years. So it is not a kind of we are seeing that new increase or new this is not a new issue, we can say. And there are the number of like increasing cases also not happening for the very first time. So it has been lingering on from 10 to 15 years. And sometimes the court they also give a draconian order, so the next day that the order is stayed. So that's how the problem is there even at the judicial level. So it is high time that the courts they stop the ambivalence, and the law is just interpreted in black and white, and there shouldn't be any gray area in this. And this means that the Municipal Corporation Act and not the Animal Welfare Board rules. So that's where basically we need more clarity when it comes to dealing with this issue. So African Union urges funding for Somali peacekeeping forces, and it's been around $90 million. So that is going to help the Somalis unless the current funding gap is filled. So in this context, basically, once it was asked in the prelims exam about these sites, that that particular site or an issue is related to which country. So that's how the questions can come up even in future. So you need to find out more about this thing. And India's push for semiconductors, we've been seeing this, we've been talking about this a lot. So why is the Indian government encouraging manufacturing semiconductors in the country? Why we are focusing so much upon the domestic manufacturing, and what are going to be advantages of it? And will the government's semiconductor ambition be limited, or it is going to expand in the coming times? So we are seeing that the push for semiconductors, or they are also called as integrated circuits. It is far more pressing now, as these chips that are found in practically every modern electrical appliance and the personal electronics devices also. So that's why it becomes very important that India is self-sufficient in their production, and they're domestically available, and we're not dependent upon other countries when it comes to importing the semiconductors. So more and more nations, they're trying to turn away from China's dominance in this space, following the geopolitical pressures to deleverage themselves from the supply chain vulnerabilities. So during the COVID-19 times, हमने देखा कि how अगर हम foreign countries पर dependent है for anything, how it can be risky for an economy, and it can basically have huge repercussions for an economy. So that's why also here we are seeing that to basically deleverage the vulnerability from the supply chain risk. So that is where we are again emphasizing more upon the domestic manufacturing of semiconductors. And while facilities for assembling the finished products, they have been growing in numbers steadily, fabs for making chipsets and displays, they are crucial parts of manufacturing processes for many electronics, and they are right now rarer. So we have been focusing upon that, and that's why their importance is also increasing, because the demand for such semiconductor chips or the fabs, that is also increasing with time. So large part of the semiconductor manufacturing, it involves the design and the intellectual labor. So India definitely has an advantage here as we talk about the demographic dividend. And we're seeing that large portion of semiconductor design engineers globally, they are either Indian or they are of Indian origin. So that's where we definitely enjoy some kind of advantage compared to other nations. So talking about some advantages that we can have. So like we've already talked about in the gist that why the government is encouraging more of semiconductor manufacturing. And can semiconductors and finished products both, can they be made in India? Definitely, like they can be made in India, but that is going to be like it would be requiring some more time in this. And apart from that, what are the other advantages that India has? So this is like a large part of the semiconductor market involves design and intellectual labor. This was already talked about. And without a sustainable pipeline of high caliber talent, China's goals for the semiconductor sector, especially in terms of further indigenizing the industry, it will not be achievable. So this is basically there's a clinical professor of the global business and technology at the UNC who is saying these things. So that's one thing. So we've already talked about the advantage also. So like we are witnessing कि China is losing control over in the face of sanctions, and there is the problem of aging population, growing aging population in China. So जो अभी China के पास advantage है when it comes to manufacturing semiconductor chips, so that is in a way it is losing, and that's where India can play even very important role when we talk about the global level. So will India's semiconductor ambition, is it going to be limited, or is it really going to be visionary in coming times or not, is the question. So the opening of display and semiconductor fabs is one of the strategic and the economic goals of India's electronics manufacturing incentive programs, and breaking new ground on the ambitious plans connected to popular brands such as Apple is something that the union government and states are equally eager to accomplish. So government, it appears to be developing the parts of the ecosystem that are promised for sustainable growth and fiscal feasibility. So obviously that is also going to help us in reducing the cost, because if we are going to expand the scale at which we'll be manufacturing them at the domestic level, even that's where when we talk about the term economies of scale, so that is also going to help us in reducing their cost also. So that is another advantage. And Ministry of State for Electronics and Information Technologies Minister of State for this ministry, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, has said that uh, the electronics value chain would have to be an international undertaking among the nations with common values to be effective. And that is if like-minded nations, each of them specializes in different aspects of the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing process, and then they work together on distribution, that still solves the geopolitical problem of the Chinese dominance without simply monopolizing power with a different country. And no country should delude themselves into thinking that they will be the king of the hill. So that is the vision that we are having, that it is not important that if right now China is having the dominance in this sector, in future another country should have the monopoly. However, we need to like ensure that different countries, they need to come up together and each one of them need to specialize in different things, and then they can work together, and then we can like kind of a way we can build a resilient supply chain when it comes to semiconductors. And coming to the next article, which is talking about why is India's Campa is at odds with a new IPCC report. So why is afforestation contested in India, and why does what does Campa play? And there's already been a question on Campa in prelims. And what are the natural ecosystems? Why they're so important? So there was IPCC, which is a UN expert body. There was a report, a synthesis report which was recently released by them. It states that not degrading existing ecosystems in the first place will do more to lower the impact of the climate crisis than restoring the ecosystems that has been destroyed. So there are two options. That firstly, we can ensure that the current ecosystems, they're not degraded further, and it is saying, the report is saying that that is going to be much more beneficial for us, that if we are able to successfully ensure that the current ecosystems, they are not degraded and they are basically they are allowed to function in much more healthy and sustainable manner in future. And the second option is that we are taking steps to restore the destroyed ecosystem. So that is not going to have much benefits, but it is important to ensure that we're not destroying the current ecosystems further. So why is afforestation contested? So India has committed to adding an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 gigatons carbon dioxide equivalent through the additional forest and tree cover by 2030. So there are some targets that we can remember. And this is as a part of the climate commitments to the United Nations afforestation, to basically commitments to United Nations. So afforestation, it is also codified in the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management and Planning Authority. It is a body which is chaired by the Environment Minister. So this is important for prelims, that CAMPA, it is an authority which is chaired by our Union Environment Minister. And whenever the forest land that is diverted to a non-forest use, such as building a dam or a mine, that land, it can obviously no longer be like it can no longer provide its historical ecosystem services, nor host the biodiversity which it used to, because that land is now diverted for any non-forest use. So according to this act of the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, we see that the project proponents that wishes to divert a land, that must identify land elsewhere to a forest. So जो ये एक्ट है ऑफ फॉरेस्ट कंजर्वेशन ऑफ 1980, इसके अंडर इट इज इम्पोर्टेंट कि अगर कोई फॉरेस्ट लैंड इट हैज़ टू बी डाइवर्टेड किसी भी नॉन फॉरेस्ट यूज के लिए, तो उस जो प्रोजेक्ट का प्रोपोनेंट है, they have to identify a land somewhere else, ताकि वहाँ पे they can plant trees, and in future there's obviously it takes a lot of time for a forest to get developed, but this is what this act is talking about कि अगर आपको किसी forest land को divert करना है, तो आपको कहीं और एक suitable piece of land identify करना ज़रूरी है, and you need to provide funds for basically planting more and more trees there, and they have to pay for the land value and also the afforestation exercise. So dono cheez ke liye you have to pay, even for the land and for the obviously for afforestation exercise. So that land will thereafter be stewarded by the forest department. So why does CAMPA matter? Why does this actually matters? Because we are seeing that the money that is paid, it sits in a fund overseen by the CAMPA. So that is overlooked by Campa. There's a fund जहाँ पे पैसा जाता है by these projects, and as of 2019, the fund had this fund it had around rupees 47,000 crore rupees. So Campa has come under fire for facilitating the destruction of the natural ecosystems in exchange for the forest to be set up in faraway places. So एक challenge इस act की अगर हम बात करें, Campa की अगर हम बात करें, so it is कि जो फंड है एक तो दैट इज नॉट बीन कम्प्लीटली एंड इफेक्टिवली यूटिलाइज जिस पर्पस के लिए इसको सेटअप किया गया था, एंड सेकेंडली जो भी फॉरेस्ट लैंड आइडेंटिफाई किया जाता है दैट इज एट इन वेरी फार अवे प्लेसेस, सो ऑब्वियसली वहाँ पे मॉनिटर करने में प्रॉब्लम्स आती होगी, एंड इट इज़ इम्पॉर्टेंट कि उस लैंड की क्या क्वालिटी है, क्या वहाँ पे फ्यूचर में फॉरेस्ट वेदर इट कैन रियली ग्रो और नॉट इज द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन दैट मस्ट कम. सो ये सारी प्रॉब्लम्स है, एंड लैंड क्वालिटी कैसी है, वहाँ का क्लाइमेट कैसा है, सो ऑल ऑफ दैट मैटर्स अलॉट. सो ये इतना इजी नहीं है जितना ये लगता है कि अगर आपको कहीं पर प्रोजेक्ट सेटअप करना है तो इजीली आप कहीं पे भी लैंड आइडेंटिफाई करके उसके लिए यू कैन प्रोवाइड फंड्स एंड यू कैन जस्ट गो ऑन डिस्ट्रॉइंग द फॉरेस्ट. सो obviously that cannot that shouldn't be the way it should be. So that is one thing. These are some of the challenges when we talk about Campa and why it has been in news. And natural ecosystem, why it is important, obviously everyone knows about it. When we talk about its carbon sequestration potential and obviously the ecosystem services that is provided by the forest when it comes to maintaining the ecological balance, and obviously the most important thing is oxygen. So some of the benefits when we talk about these ecosystems. Coming to the business page, so the GST appellate tribunal, it may be headed by a former Supreme Court judge. So the new tax tribunal expected to address the pileup of the unresolved legal cases, thus lowering the burden of the courts and taxpayers. The single member bench will hear disputes involving less than rupees 50 lakhs. So this is the limit. And obviously जो GST appellate tribunal की demand है that has been long pending demand, क्योंकि जो cases है they are piling up, and obviously इसकी वजह से judiciary के ऊपर pressure has been increasing because ये problem पहले ही थी जो there was so much of backlog of cases of pending cases. So जब GST appellate tribunal successfully बन जाएगा तो एक judiciary के ऊपर जो burden था वो भी कम हो जाएगा, and this would definitely help in expediting the dispute resolution process also. So a new appellate tribunal, which is going to be headed by ex-Supreme Court judges, it is aimed at expediting the resolution of GST disputes. So jitne bhi disputes they are related to GST, wo sare is appellate tribunal ko transfer ho jayenge. And low value cases up to rupees 50 lakhs, they may be handled by a single member benches. So this is one thing, and amendments to GST laws to enable the tribunal's constitution expected to be introduced in Lok Sabha. So to constitute this tribunal, हमें GST law को amend करना पड़ेगा, and obviously that would be done by the parliament. And currently taxpayers they filed writ petitions burdening the high court. So वो taxpayers के ऊपर से भी burden थोड़ा कम हो जाएगा with its formation. So अभी कुछ दिन पहले हिंडनबर्ग ग्रुप ने फिर से ट्विटर पे they had tweeted कि they are coming up with a one new report. So उसकी वजह से again there was कुछ estimations थे कि किससे related हो सकती है. So obviously people they started, क्योंकि जो impact हुआ on the Adani group because of their research, so उसकी वजह से again it caused fear in the minds of investors. So this time they've shorted on the Jack Dorsey's block, and as a result obviously उनके share भी गिरे हैं. एंड उन्होंने अलेज किया है कि the that the Jack Dorsey-led payments firm, it overstated its users' numbers and understated its customer acquisition cost. So this is the main thing that is highlighted by the Hindenburg research report, and their shares they have slided down by 20%. So for them, for Hindenburg Group, it's a business, but obviously it impacts the investors' interests. And moving on to the next newspaper. So firstly, we'll take up the Financial Express. After that, we'll shift to Indian Express. So some of the key changes that have been proposed in the finance bill. So finance bill further, like before moving further, it is important that we know about the articles related to finance bill in which are mentioned in the Constitution of India, and what is the procedure of passing this bill in the parliament. So all of that, basically the polity elements, all of that is important in the context of finance bill. And this is basically when we talk about some of the changes that have been proposed in this context. So that is saying that long-term capital gains in debt mutual funds, that is set to go. So that is basically, it is being planned to remove it. So taxation, the capital gains of the investors in the debt mutual funds with 35% or less of assets under management in the domestic equities, that is to be at the IT slab level. And currently investors in debt funds, they pay tax on the capital gains for holding period up to 3 years. So that is 20% tax with indexation or 10% without indexation on the gains from the longer holding. So that is the how basically how it the capital gains tax is imposed right now. And proposed tax on the amortization of the debt in the hands of invites or REITs unit holders to be restricted to the excess sum received by them over the issue price, and redemption is not a necessary condition now, and the base reduction from the proposed change will provide a significant relief to the investors who've invested in invites and REITs. So new tax on invites to be on a lower base. So these are some of the changes. So we're seeing that bonds were flat and treasury bills, they end up lower. So rupee versus dollar, it is right now at 82.26 rupees against $1. So this is our current exchange rate. And right now we are seeing that it is in a way appreciating, or we can say that rupee is strengthening. So that is relief for us. And we're seeing 10-year government bond yield, it is falling that. And when we compare the level, it is at 7.33%. But when we look at a longer time frame, okay, so this is intraday, this is for the single day. So that is for single day when we have a context, it has increased, but right now we were seeing few days back, sometime back, when it was a concern, we were talking about the inverted yield curve. So basically, the simple meaning of that is that the yield on the longer term bonds and securities that reduces, and that the yield on the short term bonds that increases. So that becomes a concern, but right now we are seeing that in intraday trading it is increased. So if that reverses back, so that would be again helping us. But when we have a look from a longer time perspective, because here it is given for one day, but when we take it for many years, so in that context we'll be seeing that the yield, it is falling on the treasury bills. So Sagar Manthan, it is a big boost. So the launch of the Sagar Manthan dashboard will have a significant impact on the overall performance of the organizations. And the platform, it has all the integrated data related to the ministry. So this is related to shipping and waterways. So we have like Sagar Manthan portal, and we also have Sagar Mala project. So our chief economic advisor is saying that the second G20 group is going to debate the global macro issues. So we need to have a clear idea about what are the important global macro issues right now. So the framework working group of the G20 finance track, it will deliberate on how the international policy cooperation it can be enhanced to achieve a strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth across the G20 nations. So, when we talk about inclusive growth, about the international policy corporations and sustainable balance, so these are certain things which are to be kept in mind. So the main thing is promoting inclusive and sustainable growth. So when we talk about the global macro issues, that includes inflation, there is energy security, there is climate change, and then we talk about security. So that is on the agenda. So and these are also the global macro issues. So disqualification can be averted if member of parliament or of a member of parliament if the conviction is stayed. So we see that if a prison term of 2 years or more is awarded, so the MP is disqualified from the house. So triggering the process of immediate disqualification from the parliament, a Surat court on Thursday, it has sentenced the Congress MP Rahul Gandhi to 2 years in jail in 2019 defamation case over his remarks about our prime minister over his surname. So, Section 8 of the RPA 1951, a person convicted of any offense and sentenced to imprisonment for not less than 2 years shall be disqualified from the date of such conviction and shall continue to be disqualified for a further period of 6 years since his release. So you need to remember the sentence very clearly, and it is being talked about in RPA 1951. However, disqualification it can be reversed if any higher court it grants a stay on the conviction or it decides the appeal in favor of that particular member of parliament. So it can be stayed, the disqualification can be stayed if the order of the court further by higher courts that is stayed. So this is very important for us. So we are seeing that both China and Russia they're taking steps to strengthen the relationships, and obviously it is going to have global repercussions for different countries, and specifically in the context of India, since we enjoy good relations with Russia, and we always say that Russia has always been an all with a friend of India. So how it would be impacting upon India is important for us. The growing closeness of Russia and China. So the Z and Putin summit and the consequent joint statement, they have two global strategic implications. One is for the Western world and one is for India. So for the Western country, it should enforce to become clear that China will be loath to see Russia fail in Ukraine. And after so much investment by China and Z in Russia, and Putin, it would be naive to expect that China to idly stand by and not take sides in the Ukraine conflict. So this may well affect the future trajectory of the conflict in Ukraine. And for India, this diminishes the strategic space that is available to India, and it complicates even the security environment in ways previously which has not been imagined as of yet. So we know that one of the largest defense equipment suppliers to India is Russia. So in that context, it can have an impact on India also, because we are having certain border issues with China. And what we are seeing, therefore, it is pincer movement in the international strategic landscape. And on the one hand, China, it has decided to throw its entire weight behind China and create an alliance of sorts. And on the other hand, we are seeing US and Europe, they will henceforth need all the support they can muster from their allies and partners to counter the Russia and China's together. They're coming closer towards each other. So these are the possible options that now USA and European countries and their allies, they would be coming together. And right now we are seeing that how basically NATO countries, they are supporting Ukraine in this war. And obviously China is, in a way, it is supporting, definitely it is supporting Russia. And the China Russia tango, it presents two challenges for India. So, Delhi's exercise of the strategic autonomy over the last 1 year, it has been premised on its long standing partnership with Russia. So, even in the context of imports of crude oil, India has definitely benefited out of that, because we've got discounted crude oil from Russia. So, even that can be impacted with the growing closeness of China and Russia. But we are seeing that Moscow is closing up with Beijing. It is certainly putting pressure on that relationship. So it is definitely putting a pressure on that thing. And Putin and Xi, they have condemned the Quad grouping, and definitely India, you know that India is a part of Quad. So that is not going to be good for India. And Moscow's positions on India's LAC troubles with China fall well below what Delhi would like to hear from a friend, and it is not clear how that can be changed. So, even in this, in the context of our border relations or our relations, the LAC troubles with China, even on that, Russia does not have very clear opinion about that. And the talking about the second challenge, so internationally, the success of India's presidency of the G20 will be measured on the outcome document, which needs the cooperation of both Moscow and Beijing. And it was very evident from the meetings of G20 finance and the foreign ministers this month that it is definitely going to be very difficult when it comes to having uh, basically a single or a joint statement of all the countries. So that's how things are changing. So European Union leaders, they are set to endorse increase in the defense assistance for Ukraine. And we're seeing the students, they are among killed as Russia, it ups its missile strikes in Ukraine. So Ukraine is short on ammo. So with Ukraine facing shortages of ammunition to fight Russia, there's idea of setting up a joint purchasing plan of action, which is similar to that devised during the pandemic to buy the vaccines, was first brought to table. And in parallel, the European Defense Agency would aggregate demands to restock and lead procedure for negotiations with providers of ammunition in Europe. So we're definitely seeing European countries, NATO, it is supporting Ukraine. So you can have a look at what India is doing to eliminate TB. And here, in the context of prelims, it is important for us to know that globally the target of eliminating TB is for 2030, but India, it has advanced it by 5 years. And for us, we are having a target and an aim to eliminate TB from India by 2025. So, how many TB cases that are detected each year in India? Although India, it remains the largest contributor to the global TB cases, the case number, it has been declining in 2021. So that is one trend. And India accounts for almost 28% of all the TB cases in the world, according to the TB report. So what is India actually doing to achieve its target? So to achieve the target of TB elimination by 2025, the government has taken several steps, which includes looking for cases actively among the vulnerable and comorbid populations, like screening them at the health and wellness centers and calling on the private sector to notify all the TB cases. So this is the first level we can say, so that we have a clear data about the number of cases in India. And the COVID-19 pandemic, it has led to improved access to more accurate molecular diagnostic tests like the CBNAT and TURNAT. So uh, this kind of question can come up, that these two terms are related to what. So we need to know that these are tests which are related to TB, so which were also used to test for COVID-19 also. So CBNAT and TURNAT. And we're also having newer drugs such as bedaquiline and delamanid, which is for the treatment of drug-resistant TB. They've been included in the government basket for drugs provided for free to the TB patients. And these oral drugs, they can replace the injectable kanamycin, which was associated with serious side effects like kidney problems and deafness. So we are having two new drugs which have been made a part of the group of the free drugs that are provided by the government. And these two drugs, they're definitely a part of the national list of essential medicines, which gives the government the power to regulate their market prices. So all the medicines which are part of this list, the power lies with the government as far as regulating their market prices is concerned. And definitely research is also going on for further developments for treating TB in India. And we've talked about this thing before, that are there newer vaccines in the pipeline? So the existing BCG vaccine, which was developed 100 years ago, it uses a weakened form of TB bacteria to train the immune system. And although it can protect against severe forms of TB like the ones in the brain, the protection is not very good against the most common form of TB in the lungs. So this is a challenge from this vaccine, and also the vaccine offers limited protection to adults and does not prevent the reactivation of a latent infection. So a new vaccine, it is basically being developed. It is the ImuVac, and it was initially developed to prevent the leprosy. So the vaccine was developed using the Mycobacterium indicus prani, that is antigens. So we've seen that recently US Fed, it has again increased its policy rate. So they're focusing, the main focus is on inflation, controlling it, but we are seeing that when we talk about its elasticity, that is not much in the context of the increase in the policy rates and the reduction in the inflation rate. So that elasticity between these two things is not so high. So that's why we are seeing that despite so much increase in the policy rates, the inflation rate, it has not, moved much towards its target levels. So in this context, we have talked about that there is definitely a need for RBI to decouple from the US Fed, because we see that whenever there is a policy rate hike by the US Fed, in India also the same thing is being done. And what does basically the Fed hike mean for the investors? So when the interest rate it rises in the US and other developed market, the foreign investors, especially from the US, they go for investments in US debt and other avenues because they feel that it is safer for them to invest in their particular country. So this impacts the flow of the funds into the Indian equity markets. So because of this, there is huge amount of outflow from the Indian markets, which is not good for our currency. It leads to depreciation. So that is not good, and because it leads to import inflation, because then imports become expensive. And we see that FPIs, they have pulled out around net rupees when we talk about the total. So it has been around rupees 27,000 crore rupees from the Indian equities since the beginning of January 2023. So you can see this impact. This is very clearly evident, and it is directly an impact on the Indian equities. And for the debt investors, as the interest rates, they are expected to rise further before stabilizing or moving on a downward trajectory. Investment advisors, they say they should look to invest in the medium to long term debt investment products as interest rates peak in the coming months. So you can invest with a medium to long term target and for a long period time frame when it is like when we're talking about investments. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining and Sarkaring. And also, you'll be provided with a PDF link. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe and hit the like button for this video.